more often than not, you just need that founder who sees something no one else can see and will not give up until they nail it.
Welcome, everyone, to the Making of a Nobody. I'm Sejal Thakkar, your host for today's discussion. And today we're diving into a debate that has many in the startup world talking. Is user experience design more important than consumer feedback? And so before we get to the heart of it, let's set the stage, right? UX design, or user experience design, is all about creating products that provide meaningful and relevant experiences for users. But as important as that is, how does it stack up to the feedback, the direct voice of the users, right? The feedback that can help your product, help you see that product from their perspective. So that's what we're going to dig into today. We're going to talk about how startups can find the right balance between a well-crafted user experience and the insights gained from consumer feedback. And trust me, there's no one-size-fits-all answer to all of this, but we've got two experts, two of our Nobody leaders here to help us dig into the nuances. Welcome back, Mark and Andy.
Hey, Sejal.
Hey, Sejal.
Great to see you both. I'm looking forward to this, Andy. This is all about you, and Mark, I'm waiting for both of you to chime in on this topic. So, as I was kind of getting ready for it, I was thinking about certain products that I started to use and how they impacted me. And there's definitely a certain magic to creating products that users don't even know they're going to need until they actually experience it, right? And so one of the products that I thought about was Apple. Apple has mastered this art of setting the trends to reshape industries, right? From the Macintosh all the way to the iPhone and beyond. They've consistently introduced these products that didn't just meet our expectations, but they created new ones. And so what's the secret behind their approach? Who wants to start us off? I'd love to hear both of your perspectives on this one.
I love that example, Sejal. I think people don't remember or realize that the first iPhone was the first expensive, complex device that we sent without a manual, right? And this is one of those things where you can ask yourself, like, what is user feedback? User feedback's like, where's the damn manual? But we actually proved, or they proved with their user experience, that you could set up your phone, you could start to use it, you could learn how to use it, you could make yourself productive without that big, thick manual we used to get with the BlackBerry and everything else before that, right? But it took a really bold vision within that design team to say, we can do this. I mean, it was just completely contrary to everything that was, standard in the industry and what users wanted, what users expected, and what every other competitor was doing. It was a big, bold statement to say, our standard is someone can bring this thing out of a box and start using it by just touching buttons, and they're going to figure out how to use this thing. I just think that was one of the most remarkable things I've seen in my career. And when I think of UX, it's that. I really do think the standard is to figure out how simple you can make your product. Can people naturally use it? There's some really fantastic products out there that are very robust, but I find them very frustrating. I find that, in the old days, I don't know, Salesforce or HubSpot or Marketo or some of these sites, like, you have to go to like training courses. And there's actually people who are certified HubSpot, users within your organization, because there's so much robust power there, but it's also very complex to use. And I just don't think that needs to be that way. And I do think, at least for us in the studio, our expectation is to just create elegant products, which you can be very powerful, very complex, very robust in functionality, but it doesn't have to be hard to use. And that'll be the goal that we're always chasing, even though we're, don't have it right now, and we'll always be chasing, trying to get better at it. But that's the standard, and I think Apple did set the standard.
Yeah, I mean, do you remember the iPod even before the iPhone, right? I pulled out my mini iPod that I bought when I was like a long time ago, when I actually used to go out and run. And it was like, there were like other portable music devices prior to that iPod, but it was more about, yeah, they made it so simple. It was more about like finding and listening to the music you like, but they made it fun and easy to use. And so, yeah, Andy, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that question too. What's the secret behind this approach?
Yeah, it's a great segue. I actually saw a video someone posted through the week about Steve Jobs and his marketing mastery. And when he launched the iPod Nano, he came out on stage and he pointed to his little pocket and said, "Does anyone know what this little pocket for is in your jeans, which is for the coins?" And he pulled out the iPod Nano as a way to show how small it was. And that's when technology was going from big to micro, and small was a whole proof point. So just that storytelling piece of how do you make something tiny from a technical production perspective, but then also able to navigate it at the same time. So there's tension immediately between size and navigation, right? And that's from technically what it can do, but also from a UX experience, what you can see and touch. And in that design, you had the same buttons doing multiple things. And even to this day, the same technology is still used on your Apple TV remote control. So if you think about that was a long time ago. So that tension for me, but I guess like stepping back from what I love, and Mark touched on it too. If you were to look at now, like a design perspective, if you're doing some slides to wind it back to something really simple, you could choose Keynote, you could do PowerPoint, you could do Google Slides, you got Canva now as well. There's pitch.com. And now in the race, you also have Gamma, which is all automated AI version that can design something for you just with a bit of content within minutes as well. So within that piece, like each of those has very different UXs, and I've been forced to use all of them. And when I say forced, because I of course have a preference that I'd want to use, and that's not the important part. But within each of them, you learn how many clicks it takes to get somewhere. And leading into the Apple example, they had this ability to somehow get the mastery right around the hierarchy. What are the things that you need to access most? How do you find them the easiest? And then all the other things that you need to have are buried a little bit deeper with more clicks. But I don't know if it was like from the early days that they managed to spend so much time to get that right, or whether it was the digital feedback that they get from users, right? So there's so much data that you can analyze from how people actually use it, and like what are the things that they're doing in the sense of this button is pressed the most, but it's buried 3 clicks down. So immediately you have to think about, okay, how do I reconfigure this to make it as easy as possible? Because you want it to be intuitive. You want it to be like human centered from a design perspective, and that takes art and skill. But what I'm curious to talk more about today is the balance of what people actually do versus what they say. In the sense of, for us with products at the moment, like let's look at a Valify, which is looking at millions of patents around the world for us to be able to quickly look at a benchmark about where a business sits in its patent risk when you're looking within that space. And from a product perspective, we hear lots of different things from different target audiences on who they are, what they're interested in, what features are specific to them. So you have that feedback, but obviously that's one person or multiple people in the same category. How do you balance that against the data that you have of how people use it, plus your experience of doing product design and UX design for so long as well? Like there's a lot of tension that happens in startups around that, and I'd love to like hear from Mark's point of view as far as from a product perspective, like when you're looking at evolutions of design, like how do you balance customer feedback versus internal experience?
Well, no, I think the Henry Ford example is the best one, right? You go back to you know the horse carriage owners of yesterday and say, what do you want? They want a faster horse carriage. They don't actually know what they want. They don't know they want a combustible engine car. They can't even imagine that, right? So if you ask people who are BlackBerry users or whatever, what do you want, they're not going to be able to tell you they want the iPhone, right? And so I just think that there's a really, as innovators, we have this really interesting tension, which is we want to define something new, we want to create new expectations, we want to wow people, um, and so you got to be careful about the feedback. I don't think you're asking necessarily feedback on what people want, but if you have an idea of a user experience that could be super easy to use, then the feedback there is like, oh, I don't get this, right? The iPad or the iPod Nano is a great example. I think you could put that in the hands of like a 8-year-old or a 7-year-old, and they're going to figure it out. But you could give that to 10 7-year-olds or 8-year-olds, and they'd be like not figuring it out, and you're like, oh, maybe my design's not working. So I think that user feedback is really important because you know the goal you're trying to accomplish, but you've nailed it when you can give it to 1,000 people and they know how to figure it out without instructions or without a manual, right? And so I do think you have to test your thesis. Sometimes your goal is, I love the Steve Jobs stories. I've got an Apple Newton, in my garage, an original Apple Newton. Um, yeah, they say that got him fired the first time around, right? But he had this vision, he had this vision for this handheld, powerful thing. It just happened to have only 64K, and I could only keep like 50 names in it, and it was completely useless. It had no phone or internet. But conceptually, it was a cool idea, right? Um, 15 years later, he was able to be back in the room and tell engineers, I want it to be this thin. It's going to have internet. It's going to have a touchable screen. It's going to, he was able to describe the product, and it was within the realm of possibility, right? He had to fire a whole bunch of engineering teams because they kept saying it's impossible, until someone said, well, it's not completely impossible. And, I think designing for something that, he's famous for saying, tell me where we need to be technology wise in 3 or 4 years, because this isn't shipping for 3 or 4 years. So how small can batteries get? How good are the screens going to become? Like, let's figure out the trade-offs and let's plan for the future. And we're going to ship the product based on future breakthroughs. And that's ballsy. But I think that's that's the business we're in, right? We have to be thinking that way. If we're not thinking that way, if it's not irrational, I think you're probably already dead on arrival.
Yeah, and I actually looked that up, Mark. With the iPhone was launched in 2007 because I was trying to figure out when it was launched. There were already other smartphones that already existed prior to that, right? But his vision was beyond just the adding more features, which is I think what a lot of founders do is like, we'll just keep adding more features to this product. He imagined a future where it would become like a central thing that everybody would use every day. So he merged the phone with the music player, the internet browser, all into one small little device, right? That you can touch. And so he didn't want to just improve what already existed. He was setting that new standard and redefining that entire industry, right? So that talks about if we can improve the experience, the more likely users are like they're going to stick around and spread the word on that product. But then, Andy, where does the feedback come into play, right? Some argue that a well-crafted design should lead the way, especially in the early stages, while others are saying that feedback from users should always have the final say. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, no, I think it's a continuation of what Mark was saying. Excuse me. So if you're thinking about a product and a vision, it's ultimately opportunities you're creating for a customer base or a problem that you're solving. And I think sometimes it can be both, sometimes it's one or the other. But having a true North Star and a vision about where you want to go, what role your product plays, and not going too far off that path, I think being able to test and learn is critical. There's things that you need to have a hypothesis on and validate as you go, and they can be big things or small things, but ultimately you need to stick to what you're doing, and that's in product design, but it's also in audience, I guess, initially acquisition, but then retention. And retention is the real art and the science as far as how do you build human relationships. And not to go too much into that today, we've definitely talked recently about that minimal viable audience and how you retain and grow those people. They become your champions. But I think from that early stage of not going too far off your path and not taking things too literally. So I think that is something, though, that must sustain. Like, you're always going to have your passionate people. And if you look at, again, let's just continue the Apple example. With every iPhone launch, you still get your loyalists that will line up for hours to get the new version before anybody else. And that's rare these days, like small releases. And it's not like the iPhone is going to sell out. Yeah, people want to have that technology in their hands. So those people are your passionate ones. So as far as Apple, they're going to have panel groups and people that give them feedback all the time. And even that's automated. Like when you get a new iPhone, it actually asks you, are you happy to send anything that happens to their developers? And you need to approve that as part of the legal settings. That happens on the Mac, on an iPhone. So they're getting that dynamic feedback already. But there's things that sometimes customers say, and we've seen it even in a Valify, going back to our family, where something that it could be a really sort of naive or innocent comment that just sparks something that you go, yeah, we've actually not thought of that. Because when you're knee deep in a product, you can get so myopic that it needs someone who's either outside the field or not aware of what you're building just to give you something that can be quite often a Hail Mary as far as, well, that's something we'd never thought about. And from a nobody culture perspective, like, we love the crowd. We have our own crowd. Each of our businesses have a crowd, and each of those people allow us to be the best we can be because they're stress testing us. Like, you can't rest on your laurels and always assume you're right. You need to have this objective point of view, and that comes from customers, from product teams, but also key stakeholders that are partners of your business.
Yeah, so let's keep going on that thought. I love that, right? But this is where startups struggle with finding that right balance, right? Between maintaining your initial, strong design that you might have had, the vision for the design of your product, and then the feedback that you're getting. What do you think the biggest challenge is in this balancing act?
I kind of hinted at it before. I actually think it's a really fine line between understanding if you're trying to convince a market that doesn't exist yet, which you need to have like this, maniacal, naive, founder kind of energy, and you can create something that didn't exist before, right? Versus hearing loud and clear, people don't want this. And if there was a really simple way to figure that out, I would bottle it up and sell it, right? I don't think that there is a simple answer to it. I do think that that maniacal energy, that naive energy of like a founder sees something no one else can see. And even if it hasn't been quite brought to fruition yet, and people are like, oh, that sucks, I don't like that. It's like they still are driving to make it better, right? And they know it one day they'll be like, aha, I finally got it. And again, it could be the Apple Newton compared to the iPad, right? 15 years apart, he finally nailed his vision, but he flopped with the first vision, right? So, I do think that you need to have that. It's definitely a data point that tells me that something's going to work or not in terms of the venture world if someone's got that maniacal energy. But I don't know how to figure out the difference between you know that naivety and that passion versus being tone deaf to what people are trying to tell you, right? I think they can coexist, but I think that more often than not, you just need that founder who sees something no one else can see and will not give up until they nail it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And like, for me, now having an extra minute to think about it, Sejal, and not being caught out, I think that it's something quite interesting as far as seeing to the future, but also Mark talked to it earlier around the ability to, as technology advances, you could have a vision for a product, but technology doesn't quite exist at the scale that you need today. But if you're doing product design, particularly electronics and hardware manufacture, obviously you need to have R&D, you need to be testing, you need manufacturing and distribution. So there's a long timeline that happens within that. So you need to be factoring in what you can do in a year and 2 years' time to be able to know what you're building. But then also, I think the transparency of what your vision is and ultimately where you want to get to, like building trust with your audience. And it's like, this version is not going to be the best one that you experience. And I'm sure that we could all think of dozens of examples of products, software, hardware, whatever, where the first version was not great. And then it continued to get better. And I'm a massive audiophile, and I had the very first Sonos that came out. And the connection was like a real pain, and it just broke all the time. But the fact that I had such a good quality speaker that I could connect on Bluetooth, and now the evolution of that product is huge. And being an early adopter quite often in tech means that you spend more than everybody else. Winding it back as well, I'm sure you remember first time. I remember my parents getting a phone in their car. I remember when the phone would ring and the car horn would beep, and it was like you'd spend a couple of $1,000s on this phone. And at that time, and whenever that was, the 80s, it was a lot of money. So there's also that piece too. So technology gets cheaper. So like nurturing that investment of your loyal customers and rewarding that as you go, but letting them know the vision of where you want to get to, and being open about progress you're making combined with what you see the future being. Like that is a special human that Mark talked to be able to do all of those things concurrently.
I really love that. I'm glad you said that because I believe that, but I hadn't said it. Like I just believe that the transparency in your early adopters is super important, right? And you don't have to ship a perfect product, right? Especially in software. You think about the Steve Jobs world. Yeah, of course you got to, certain, form factors and functionality. You're going to sell something to the masses. People expect you to be able to do that, right? But I think you can do a lot with a lot of products these days where you're like, hey, we think this is probably a cool thing to do. What do you guys think? And you can just be very transparent. You can share your passion and your ideas to solving those problems, and you can add value and put things out there, and people will engage. Now these aren't your mass market customers, but those early adopters can be incredibly valuable, right? Incredibly loyal. They can give you fantastic feedback. Some of those people become employees. Some of those people become founders, investors. Like, I just really believe that the idea that you're going to be a stealth kind of startup trying to build up everything and go voila, I just think those days are over. And I love another thing you said, Andy. I talked about building the iPad or whatever, envisioning technology in 4 years, right? I actually think that's now more relevant in software than ever before, also, right? Look how fast GPT has moved, right? I think people struggle to understand how fast it's going to go. I talk to founders, or I hear people, making investment pitches or whatever. I'm like, they don't even know that they're going to be obsolete before they finish their PowerPoint deck. Like, I think it's really interesting to say the kind of same thing Steve Jobs would say. Where is the battery life going to be? Where is screen technology going to be? Where is, internet connectivity to be? Like, he was able to build a device 4 years ahead of time, right? Where is AI going to be in 4 years? And let's build a product for that. Those are kind of things that I keep myself up at night thinking about. Where is the technology going to be? Because everybody right now, I think, is reactionary. It's happening so fast that they're just reacting to, oh my God, I can't believe that's capable. I can't believe that's possible. You can go ahead and forecast where it's going to be in 3 or 4 years, and those are the products you should be building.
Yeah, I love what both of you are saying. It's knowing when to listen and when to stay the course, right? So, are there certain stages in a startup's journey that, where you should prioritize the UX design, where it makes more sense than getting the user feedback, or vice versa? And maybe you can give an example or some of, I think, like ovations. When I think of ovations, it was something that we got a lot of feedback on very early on, because a lot of people were excited about the bold vision that we've had, and we've done interviews, we've talked to a lot of the speakers and talent that have been on that platform, and now we're sort of coming out with version 2, right? So are there certain stages where it matters more than others?
I don't know if there's a stage that matters more than others. I think that we've had a number of products that we've launched where we look at it afterwards, we're like, that is not our standard. And you can hear the feedback, you can hear friction, you can see things aren't, maybe moving as fast as you want in certain categories. And then usually comes back to design. So I think that the faster you can nail design, the better. Look, I think it's hard to find great designers. I think there's a lot of people who design things. And you could say, here's my set of requirements, here's the iPhone. 200 people would come back with a design that does not look like the current iPhone, right? There's one person who's going to be like, oh, I know how simple I can make this. And I think that gold standard of that kind of talent, we're always looking for. So if you guys are listening and you know somebody, or you are that person, man, we need all that. We need as many of that talent as possible, right? We just believe that that's key to building great products. But it's just like saying, a Tom Brady and football. Like, these are, 1 in a million to find really amazing designers, versus people who know how to design something is different than how to nail amazing user experience. So yeah, we're always looking for those gems.
Yeah, Andy, do you have any tips on how we can manage feedback without letting it derail our vision, or over adjusting based on the feedback we're getting without losing that core vision of the product?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's been really pragmatic, but also quite well planned on how you're thinking about the role that consumer feedback plays. And what I mean by that is that you have your own hypothesis. You're thinking about how you want to evolve your product and where you're ultimately going to get to, and taking people on that journey as far as updating them on forthcoming releases, things that you're looking to do, and letting them know ultimately what you want that experience to be. And if they're informed like your own team are informed, then they're able to be quite objective with what they're saying back to you, because like, you've got to be really careful about nurturing relationships. So anything that's subjective, like how you deal with that, if someone sees, okay, they've done a new software release, an update that I put on my cell phone, but they didn't take on board what I said, then people can get despondent. So you've really got to set up that what they're doing, they're basically someone that's part of a research project, and we need to go with what suits the largest audience, or what is aligned to the product vision, and all those things are valuable. But it's managing expectations like anything, right? Human beings can be sensitive creatures, as we know, but they're the people that are going to ultimately help us succeed. So setting up the context, testing, being clear in your hypothesis, and then thinking about, okay, how much does this input, or I guess interrupt what we were already thinking or complement what we were doing, and then having that pragmatism to put the right level of attention on the right piece of feedback.
Yeah, thank you. I love that. And I love having, real world stories. I think that really helps to kind of understand what should lead and what feedback you should be. There's a lot of noise. You get a lot of noise from people too, right? When they're expecting a product to be a certain way, like Mark said, right out of the gate, right? They expect it to have certain features and whatnot. So there's a lot of noise that you have to get. But one of the examples that I use when some of the workshops that I've done is YouTube. When they first created that feature where you upload the videos onto the onto the website, there was one critical oversight. The design wasn't optimized for left-handed users, right? So all of these videos that people were uploading they were uploading with their left hand were upside down, they were sideways, and then quickly the noise started coming in. All of the YouTube users started complaining about the fact that this was not meeting their expectations, and this was a really important pivotal moment for YouTube, right? Because they got this feedback and they were able to quickly change and update the product to add that feature and address that issue, right?
I love that too, where it can go the other way. And I'll go back to Sonos, and I'm a loyalist, obviously, but that's gone as far, and Apple's the same thing, where they actually have people that are so dedicated to the product that they self-volunteer to manage forums like you'd have on Reddit. So if you can't get the technical support you need from the company, there's a whole series of people that have expertise in things because they're passionate community members. And that's like the holy grail of where you want to get to with your customers, where they care about it that much. And they just had a huge PR disaster recently, actually, where they pushed out this huge overhaul of their app. And it just had all sorts of errors. And I don't know what happened internally. But managing that can be the other side of that as well, which is worth calling out, where you need to make sure that you are being rigorous and where things can go the wrong way. And from your publicity team, marketing team, product team, how do you then flip and go into sort of, I guess, mitigation and sort of management of something which has gone really wrong?
Yeah, and they quickly recognized the issue and made changes to the upload features. They added software that could automatically detect the video's orientation before it was actually, and they introduced simple editing tools, right? But this was a key lesson, is that we have to be inclusive in our design of the product, right? And be mindful of that user experience. And so I know we're almost at time, but I have one more question, right? So data. We have so much data now, right? We're collecting data on, like you said, where we're pressing the buttons, who's pressing the buttons, and we're monitoring everything. And so how do you balance the use of data, right, with intuition and creativity in the design process? Is there a point where you should trust your gut versus what the numbers are telling you?
I don't know about that part, but I would say that the part that we haven't talked about yet is like the science of UX, and it really is data driven. I can't tell you how many brilliant technologists that I've argued with when they, show me their user interface, and it's just so complex and there's so many options, and I'm like, guys, 1% of the users are going to use that. They're like, well, but someone might want it, and so they fill a user interface with all these features. A lot of what Apple did is, there's a lot of names, but it's called zooming interface. A lot of people refer to it as zooming interface, which is what is the next logical thing I want to do. And that's then when I see it, right? I don't see all the possible options on step 1. I only see it when it's the relevant thing from step 3 to 4. And you can think about that from the iPad, the iPod Nano, right? Your music, selecting your playlist, like these things are all kind of nested within each other, but it allows you to just have a handful of options. And I do believe that that's, the data will tell you that. So you can argue the technologist saying, everybody's going to want this. And you say, yeah, not really. 1 out of 1,000 people wanted that. That means we can bury it somewhere else, right? And then you can, kind of prioritize your user experience that way based on the most likely, most used features, and the rest you just want to bury. Otherwise, it's complex.
Yeah, I think the other side of that too, which I'm fascinated by, I had an audio branding business back in the day, and within that, you're thinking about feedback loops as well. And there's all sorts of feedbacks, like you have haptics on your cell phone, through to sound, through to color, all these elements of human psychology. So as a human being, and proprioception and all the senses, we're taking these signals all the time, and we have things that we don't even actively think about that our brain just does on our behalf. So understanding that about how we process certain things, even certain colors, like from a UX point of view, there's ways that you can guide people through an experience, and like there's obviously a journey that you want them to take, and there'll be things that they may explore themselves, but it's how you find the way to take that digital feedback and all that data, merge that with human psychology about ways that people just, their eyes go when they look at a screen, what their eyes are drawn to, movement, all those kind of things. And then the feedback loops of haptics and sounds and triggers, like when you hover over something, all those subtleties allow you to be able to create something that feels very human, it's intuitive, and which is why Steve Jobs was so bold to launch the iPhone without a user manual, because they were so confident on the UX that it felt so human, considering it was the first really full touchscreen of its kind at that scale. There were like small little examples previously, but I think that is the part that I love too, is like being human, and humans will never evolve as fast as technology. Technology is way ahead of us now. It'll take generations for us to feel native in that environment. So that's the other side for me. And I could talk about human psychology and experience for days.
Well, I mean, that could be another topic, right? Because there's a lot of buzz around AI and personalized experiences. And I'll ask one more question. How do you see the role of user feedback evolving in the future, right? When AI can apparently predict user behavior, does that mean that feedback is going to get less important, or is that just going to be another tool for helping us understand the users better? It's another topic, right? We could go another 30 minutes on just that topic.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think you're going to get these... you'll have a period of self-reinforcing feedback for a while, where AI will optimize for what it thinks it's seeing, and it's going to give you what you want to see it thinks, and you're going to be happy about it, you think, but you're actually not going to be. And so it'll optimize, but it'll probably optimize the wrong thing until it gets a little bit more smart. Look, I think AI is, the power of, automating, especially data science discovery and optimizing for what you're seeing in user behavior is fantastic. Because otherwise, what do? You have to hire a bunch of people to look at data. Like, that's inefficient, right? AI does not scare me, but I always say, like, it doesn't bother me to say, if there's things that we're really suck at as humans, like, I'm glad for someone to take that over. And we suck at looking at data and just like spending hours crunching through stuff. And there's a few human beings that like doing that, but most of us don't. And we actually are going into an ADHD kind of world as a society, right? So I just think that there's, crunching through massive amounts of data and seeing what the signals are. Those are things that are going to be automated, and user research and user experience is one of those things that's just a no-brainer. It's never going to take out the artistry, right? So I do believe that there's like the Michelangelo of user experience combined with AI-powered data is going to be able to make better interfaces faster than ever before compared to what we did in the last couple decades.
Yeah, Andy, do you want to add anything else on this debate that we've been talking about?
Yeah, I would say, like, you've got a live example right now. If you look at the algorithm of Instagram versus TikTok, like two different approaches to the same thing, both designed very deliberately to steal your attention and drive dwell time and repeat usage. And there's a lot of things in there in itself. But as far as TikTok, which leans more into things that you're interested in, versus Instagram, which is more through your network about what they're doing, but like they're really intuitive. And that personalization, this is very subjective personal feedback, I wouldn't say it's industry feedback, is that sometimes that can be good in that you're getting more of what you like. But the flip side is that then I'm also missing out on a bunch of stuff that I may want to see that it doesn't think that I want to. So like that personalization thing has a lot of assumptions, particularly when there's a lot of data and things that you can see. So there's a glaring gap in that as well. And we make decisions as humans, and I don't think they'll ever know what we're thinking right now to be able to give us the best experience. But in theory, it should be better. But that can only go so far in my mind.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It's an exciting time, right, for blending technology with human insights. And I think it's a perfect note for us to end this conversation on. Thank you, Mark and Andy, for sharing your perspectives. And to our audience, thank you for joining us. We hope that the session has given you some new ways to think about balancing user design and user feedback in your own journey, right? So the next time you're designing a product, ask yourself, am I just meeting the needs of today, or am I daring to imagine the possibilities, right, of tomorrow? That's where true innovation lies. Thank you both for joining us, and we'll see you all next time.